Welcome to the Last American Vagabond. Joining me today to discuss the newest Venezuela coup attempt. I was just laughing a moment ago about how many times it's actually been, and to discuss the interesting overlap of the usual social media, mainstream media overlap kind of agenda, CIA push to frame things a certain way, the starvation tactics versus the sanctions and so on, and how long back this is, and the interesting overlap of Elon Musk and kind of the different version of where we are today with social media. Here to discuss all of this and give me his thoughts about it is Jimmy Dore. Thanks for joining me, Jimmy. How are you?
My pleasure. Good to see you.
You too, man. You too. This is something you've talked a lot about in the past, just, and rightly so, about Venezuela, about the regime change efforts, the manipulation around the media in general, and the suffering of the people, And so I thought it was a good person to have you jump on and talk about where you think this one's going and kind of just what you see in it in general. So I kind of like to start in general with, your thoughts on the past, the background, your thoughts on past Venezuelan regime change efforts, what you think, what's going on there, and, kind of your general premise on why that's all happening.
Well, Trump gave the game away. I think a month or two ago, he was given a campaign speech, and he put the sanctions on Venezuela in an attempt to start a color revolution, an attempt to cause economic pain that would cause the people to uprise and try to overthrow their government. And then we would come in and install a puppet like Juan Guaido, and we could steal their oil, right? And so this all started and so he said that. He said, boy, yeah, Venezuela was ready to go. If I was there, we could have had all that oil. We could have had all that oil. And he said it. I mean, so he said that before, like when they asked him, why are you leaving the troops in Syria? And he said, for the oil is secured. The oil is ours. It's our oil. And so that's, again, why he's a bad face of imperialism, is he'll just tell the truth sometimes. That's right. It's like, it's not because he's a big liar. If you think the establishment hates Donald Trump because he went to Washington, D.C. and started lying, I've got a vaccine I'd like to sell you. The reason why he's bad for them is because he's such a political novice, is that he blurts out the truth about our foreign policy. And our foreign policy is about invading, overthrowing, installing puppets, and stealing smaller, weaker countries' natural resources. And that's exactly what's been happening ever since Chavez wanted to keep the oil and distribute it to the poor. That's been a big problem for the oligarchy, not only in Venezuela, but for here too. So that's obviously the game. And so what surprises me so much is that with the advent of Twitter and YouTube shows like mine and shows like yours, and the gray zone, and what we've all learned from Libya, what we've all learned from 20 years of the Afghan papers, what we've learned from Ukraine, that it all goes out the window, and people immediately, because you say Maduro's a communist, the MAGA people seem ready to go along with this because he's a communist, and those elections are fraudulent. And what I say to those people is, the only reason you haven't, they just had an election in a country, and now I'm blanking on the name of the country in Africa, where the winner got 95% of the vote. Did you hear Anthony Blinken saying anything about that? Did you hear Elon Musk saying anything about that? Well, right. That's because they're okay with that we love dictators, as long as we can control them, right? So it's democracy that's messy for the economic hitmen of the West, right? And so what I tell people is that the only reason you have an opinion on the election integrity of Venezuela, or care at all, is because you've been told to. You've been fed this idea that you should care about it by the economic hitmen who've been overthrowing and trying to coup their governments for the last 25 years and installing puppets so they can steal their natural resources. The fact is, it doesn't matter if that was 100% fraudulent election, which it doesn't seem like it was at all. It seems like it was on the up and up, but because there was almost 1,000 election observers, and I haven't heard anything. But the point is, even if it was a fraudulent election, That's none of our fucking business. That's none of your business. That's none of my business. That's none of Elon Musk's business. That's up for the people of Venezuela to work out internally their political problems. Just like they go, well, all those protesters can't be paid. I heard someone say that all of them can't be paid. Well, so because people are protesting a government, we're supposed to now then go in and help coup that government, and we're supposed to overthrow. No, there were people protesting on January 6th in the United States. They didn't like the results of that election. Should we have invited another country to come in and impose their form of democracy on our country? Hey, even though I know I don't live in a democracy in the United States, for a fact, I live in an oligarchy and our leaders are elected, not elected. I know that. I still don't want another country coming in here and imposing their idea of what democracy should be on my country. So we should do the same thing with Venezuela. It's a hands-off Venezuela. It's none of our business. And the only reason you care or have an opinion is because you've been told to by the same people who did Ukraine, the same people who did Syria, the same people who did Libya, Iraq, and Afghanistan for 20 years. That's the only reason you're falling into the same people's hands, just like Maduro said, the same system that killed JFK, tried to assassinate Trump, are the same system you're propping up by having an opinion about the election in Venezuela. So that's where I stand.
Absolutely. Well said. And I think that to point out that it's, as you're highlighting this long-term effort, it's been both sides of the false paradigm, right? And that's important to see, that it's always the same thing. And, so I might have even been you that made this point, I forget, but the good example on top of what you said is Haiti, for example, that hasn't had an election in quite a long time, but they don't seem to have an issue with that because clearly they're getting what they want from it. It's this hypocrisy. I'd love to ask you a little bit more about what you pointed out there. And, I actually am not even sure exactly where you stand today on maybe nowhere where you think your kind of political leaning is, but I hate the way that this tends to be, communism bad, X, Y, and Z good, this really lazy, one-sided view of it all. So I wanted your thoughts on the history around simply, like you already kind of highlighted, just claiming Venezuela is the problem when obviously it's U.S. and foreign entities, at least in a large part, causing their problems. But the weird effort to always make it about communism or socialism, my opinion is simply that any government, as we're literally living through right now, can collect at the top, power at the top, and abuse you in the same way. I don't think it's unique to any one of these things. But what's your thought on that, and why communism is such a focal point, or socialism, of the ire of the right?
Well, because the people who, again, the economic hitmen have very cleverly wedded the term communism to mean the worst forms of authoritarianism and dictatorship, along with everything they hate about the woke left and the identity politics that is shoved down their throats. And so so that's what people associate communism with. If you go to Venezuela, it's not the communism of old Russia, right? Of the Soviet Union. It's not. It's they've nationalized their natural resources, which I wish we would do that here in the United States.
Right.
Why does ExxonMobil get to make hundreds of billions of dollars in shale oil, taking the oil that's underneath all of our land, right? So anyway, but that's another story. But if you go there, I would say 80% of their economy is not state run. It's that they have, capitalism and they have buying and selling in the stores and individual ownerships and all that. So people aren't told that. They're told they're communist, right? And so they have this idea. We've all been conditioned to hate communism and to think it's the equal to Nazism and authoritarianism and all that stuff. And all Chavez and Maduro, it seems to me, have really done is made sure that the wealth of the country inherently in their natural resources is then shared with the people of that country instead of a handful of oligarchs, which puts them in, puts Maduro and Chavez in opposition to their own oligarchy, right? And so that's why they were, hoarding their goods, and the government had to go in and break into warehouses. And it's so, but this, again, it's all the same economic hitmen, the capitalists who did the sanctions. Now we won't. So when the United States sanctions them, they're not allowed to. It makes it much harder for them to sell their natural resources, and because and so now they're living. So we're creating economic strife inside. It's not. They go, well, communism doesn't work, and that's why their economy is so bad. And well, if you really believe that communism is destined to fail, and why don't you just let it alone? Why do you have to impose all these unbelievable sanctions? And the United States sanctions are powerful because we are still the reserve currency of the world. Right now, the United States has about a third of the world under economic sanctions, which is why there are now power centers like BRICS and others coming together to find a way out of this, right? Because they're so sick of us weaponizing the dollar the way the United States has, that they need to find an alternative. So what it is basically just terrorism, what the United States is doing. We're terrorizing Venezuela. We're terrorizing other countries, Russia. When we do our it's economic terrorism. When sanctions are a form of war. And
Right.
so if we really believe that Maduro would fail, his economic system would fail, why don't we let him do it? Same thing with Cuba. If we really think it would fail, why do we have to have sanctions on it that cripple that country economically? Why don't we let them just have an equal shot at it and see what happens? Because, of course, we know, because the economic hitmen, the capitalists, the last thing they want you to do is to be shown that a certain form of socialism is actually good. A certain form might actually work. And because that means less money for them. So that's why it's very powerful. It really does work. You call them a communist, and that's all a lot of people have to hear. So I have my audience is left wing, center, and right wing, MAGA. I have socialists and Bolsheviks watch my show. I have MAGA people watch my show. So I've been trying to explain to the MAGA people over this Venezuela thing is that you're being manipulated by the same people who the same faction of people who did Ukraine, did Iraq, did Libya, Syria. It's the same people, and it's for the same exact reasons. It's for economic terrorism and to fill their pockets, not yours.
Yeah, exactly. And it's such a constant reality. And I'm glad you're saying that too, because, I love that it's one of the things I'm really trying to show people, as a lot of these things seem to kind of be dismantled and burning down for any number of reasons, is that they're always desperate to make this such a partisan issue. COVID-19 was not partisan as much as they tried to make it that way. Even with Israel right now, these are always slanted, but it's much more open than they want you to see. And so that example is perfect right there, is that you have people all across the spectrum watching your show because you're interested in getting into things that aren't only pitted into one side or the other. And this has been pitted in that for such a long time. And you mentioned, what I did want to say one thing about the percentages. You make a great point right there. Somebody just brought this to my attention, which is interesting, that the natural resource part of it is very important. And even with BRICS and the rest of it, I'm always on guard that these are still governments that will still attempt, in my opinion, to collect power at the top in any form. But I agree that it's the logical response to it. And the idea is that clearly the percentages, I think the U.S. government, or the United States situation, is only about 13% more or less, rather, of government control. And it's a small percentage difference. And yet they're this communist socialist problem, and the U.S. is the exact opposite, the shining beacon. It's just blindness. It's lying to yourself about it, And what I think is important to get into Trump's coup during his administration, and the interesting point, and I have a clip if we want to play it, from both Bolton and from Elon or Elliot. Blanking on his name all of a sudden. But anyway, they're two Trump representatives, Elliot Abrams, and they're both publicly admitting to the fact their sanctions are the reason they're suffering. But of course, as you just briefly mentioned a moment ago, that's the whole point, driving the people to suffer so they revolt on their government. And this caused, as they again point to in celebration almost, the caravan, which was then later used to push other policies of immigration. And so I want your thoughts on that. We're seeing this around the SAVE Act and the digital ID involvement around the voting of illegal immigrants. I feel like the right is being played in so many ways right now through these wedge issues. So can you give your thoughts on the whole caravan, which probably is going to happen again after this goes forward?
Yeah, well, I've tried to explain to my audience that, the effect of Donald Trump putting sanctions, and John Bolton, that cretin, putting sanctions on Venezuela and then bragging about it, is that I think 7 million people have left Venezuela because of the economic pain that we're inflicting. And where do you think those 7 million people are going? right? Do you think they're going to Guatemala? They're coming to the United States, right? And then they have the same oligarchs who are putting on those sanctions, make sure there's an open border policy here in the United States, right? So,
Right.
and then they give them, debit cards, and we've seen what's happening, and that there's a reason why that's happening, and it's because of our economic policies, because of our drug war, and the New York Times just admitted accidentally that they just arrested the two biggest drug cartels from Mexico, and they admitted in that article accidentally, again unwittingly, that this will have no effect on the drug trade or the fentanyl or the cocaine coming in, and in fact it will increase violence because now there's going to be a scramble for that kind of power to fill the vacuum that was created by those arrests. So the drug trade never going to stop. We're just going to keep exacerbating the problems that come because of it. And so it's the same thing with our economic sanctions. And so, once I found out that Venezuela had more oil than Saudi Arabia, I knew it was just a matter of time before we had to bring their people some democracy. Of course, that's happened. And when you see Antony Blinken saying that he's concerned that the will of the Venezuelan people is not being expressed, he doesn't give a shit about the will of the United States people being expressed. Right now, he's supporting a candidate that hasn't gotten one vote. And all of a sudden, she's supposed to be the next president of the United States because they rigged another primary. That's 3 in a row. These people who say they're putting democracy on the ballot rigged 3 primaries: the Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, which was admitted to by the DNC chairwoman Donna Brazile, and Elizabeth Warren admitted it on CNN that they rigged that 2016 primary. The problem was Bernie Sanders is such a cuck to power, he would never bring that up or make them pay a price for doing so, right? He's just a worthless go along for the empire, which is what his role was. His role is to take all the revolutionary energy that was in the left and funnel it back into a pro-war, anti-worker party. And that's exactly what happened, right? Which is why a lot of people hated me who were Bernie supporters for a while. But now they've all come back around. They all realize, oh, it turns out I hated Jimmy when he was telling me the truth about Bernie. But that was just now I see the truth, and he was right. So that happens all. That happened with AOC, with Forced to Vote. It happened with Bernie Sanders. It happened with Hillary Clinton. It happens with this. So I'm used to that happening with me and my show, and people hating me because I'm telling them the truth. They don't want to hear it first. And then, but so the same people, if you really believe Antony Blinken cares about the will of the people of Venezuela, when they obviously don't give a shit about the will of the people in the United States, then I've got a vaccine I'd like to sell you. Of course they don't care. And you're being manipulated again. And I tell my audience all these things, and some of them hear it, and some of them it takes a little while longer for it, because that anti-communism bug is deeply embedded. It's like a tick. You got to burn it out. And I'm doing the best I can, but that's I think a lot. The problem is, like, you get asswipes like Elon Musk out there pushing the propaganda at the top of his lungs. People forget that when they did a coup in Bolivia for the cobalt, he bragged about it. He said, "That's right, we'll coup anybody we want for the cobalt." I'm not making that up. I saw that tweet.
I've got it up on the screen. He actually deleted it recently, which I think is important.
No kidding.
Yeah, this is just a screenshot because it's now gone. I think I've got that up too. But I don't know. I tried to find out exactly when it happened, because it's even more relevant if it just happened.
Okay, now I took a screenshot of your screenshot, so now I have.
Oh, good. Yeah, I mean, it's important, and this actually just where I was going to go next in general. The interesting overlap to this. I mean, we're going to talk just about Venezuela. We can really go any other direction we want, but it's also this bigger thing that I just can't not see at the moment. This mostly aimed at the right, and it's through this kind of, as I think you recently talked with Whitney about the JD Vance, Thiel, Elon Musk, kind of this weird developing, like the way I keep framing it, it's like the Citibank Obama scenario. It's like we're watching the same thing, but technocratically directed, happening in front of us, And so right now, what I wanted to get into is what you just described, but in the interest of lithium, right? We're clearly in this direction now of rare earth minerals and how important that is, the China overlap. Bolivia, which is where that tweet comes from, is obviously one of the largest lithium locations on the planet. And clearly he responded, and that was what the whole point was about, saying we'll coup whoever we want. And lithium is obviously important to what he is driving forward. So the question then becomes, is that now something that's part of this? Because Venezuela has one of the most undiscussed lithium reservoirs, whatever you want to call it, in the world as well. It's a gigantic one, billions of tons. And so I wonder whether that's a part of this. And so just first your thoughts on that, and then we can go over some of the, aggressive disinformation that he's been sharing from very pro-Israel accounts that seem to have already deleted a lot of what he's been sharing. So what are your thoughts on that whole kind of swirling dynamic and why this is happening?
Well, so let me correct myself. I thought I said cobalt, but it was lithium. So, yeah,
I think cobalt's part of it too, to be honest.
Okay, but that's certainly why he's interested. And yes, he's been. I just was talking about this at dinner last night. That, yeah, he's out there spreading, disinformation hard, and of course he's manipulating his algorithm to boost his own disinformation. But at least he's not stopping anybody else from countering it, right? So that's really all I can ask. I think it's horrible that he's spreading disinformation, and I will denounce him for it. But at least he'll let me denounce him for it, right? So I think that's a positive. That's all I want. I want a chance to be able to speak freely in the public square, and that's what Twitter is. That's what Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm just about to get banned for my second time from TikTok. They're the worst. But
yeah.
Yeah. But Twitter is really it's not perfect by any means whatsoever, but it is 1,000% better than it was, and it's 1,000% better than Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. That's for sure. And TikTok. That's for sure. So, yeah, I like the chance. I like the fact that regular people can respond to him. So, for instance, I saw Jackson the Hair Hinkle do a tweet against Elon Musk's coup in Venezuela propaganda, and he got like 40,000 likes on it, and so that's really encouraging, right? So people's voices like Roger Waters can be heard now and get a lot of eyeballs. Millions of people will see it, not just the millions of people that normally just see the propaganda. So it's like if the New York Times allowed you to post on their front page, I'd feel a lot better about the New York Times than I do. But Twitter allows you to post on their front page. So that's really all I want. That's enough for me. I think that's enough to save a semblance of democracy.
Well, I would push back a little. I agree with you in a general sense. I really do. Obviously I have my account, right? That's the first thing I always say. It's like, well, it's hard for me to complain that but to your point, I'm here now when I wasn't before. But my personal gut, opinion, I feel like there's something much different happening today that I can't necessarily prove in every angle, but I feel like a lot of it today is much more social engineering and algorithmic machine learning kind of stuff. And so, it's hard to say. I hope you're right. And I hope, I see the benefits of it too, but I also see a lot of the downside. And I wouldn't argue that everybody's getting that. I do, like, to your point, having such aggressive promotion versus suppression, and some cases just people straight up being censored still, because that is still happening. So it's a mixed bag, but I do agree that in some cases I see that, and I'm glad to be able to post and respond as well. But I just worry that it's still having the desired effect, even if we're, allowed to scream into a little bit of a scene corner, but not as, I just feel like it's a little bit different. But I do think,
at least go, I don't mean to interrupt you, but people can at least, they can go to your Twitter feed if they're interested, and go to Glenn Greenwald's Twitter feed. They can go to Matt Taibbi's. They can go to Anya Parampel and Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate. They can go to my Jackson Hinkle. So people, if they're interested, and go, hey, wow, I wonder what I wonder what they're saying about what Elon Musk is tweeting out. I wonder what they're saying about what the New York Times is saying, or Antony Blinken is saying, and so now at least they can go and find that stuff very easily, and then they can also help amplify it. So yeah, I hear. Yeah, again, like I said, it's not perfect, but it's 1,000 times better than it used to be.
Yeah, no, it's still a fair point. And I don't disagree. I think that at the end of the day, we're seeing a definite, some positives that weren't there before. I just, again, something internally, it just tells me that it's not what it appears to be, that we'll see down the line. Oh, that's kind of what was happening right there. But again, I hope that this is a positive direction. But to the main point though, so the question becomes, is it, mean, no, let's just leave. Let's just say we agree that there's a positives to this, that we're able to get past it. But then on the other side of it, we have stuff like this, which is what we were just kind of highlighting. One, this is the one that's already been deleted. And I just simply said, once again, Elon blindly sharing Zionist propaganda. Elon is, by the way, Elon has deleted the tweet I was just highlighting a second ago. That's this one that's now gone about we'll coup whoever we want, that everybody wrote about, very real. But the point was about this tweet that he's now deleted himself as well. Coming from another tweet, which Visbrograd has also deleted. Go ahead.
What? Oh, can I see it? Can you show it?
Yeah, this is the one right here. So the Elon Musk is sharing this tweet. He deleted this tweet that just simply says this is messed up. And then of Visbrograd 24, who is I've done segments on this. They've deleted so many tweets that have been incorrect information about Israel. They're very much an Israeli propaganda platform. And it was a fake video that went around saying armed Maduro gangs were stealing polling information. It wasn't. They are air conditioners. It's an old video, and they were even fact-checked on Twitter. But I think it's interesting, right? So this got 45 million views. You can't see that now since it's been deleted even by him. But 45 million views on this reach, which most people don't turn around and recognize that it's false. So I've got a lot of examples we can go over. Here's Megatron calling him out, saying you're spreading fake news. So the question is, and again, let me be clear. I agree with you. This is free speech. He has a right to lie knowingly. That's free speech that I'll defend. Because we have a right to jump in and say you're lying, right? But what are your thoughts on this? And have they recognized that it's just more beneficial to allow us to scream on the corners when this is getting enough reach? And I guarantee this is affecting things around the world. What's your thoughts on this?
No, obviously it's affecting things around the world. That's why he does it. He wants to affect things around the world, and that's why he bought the platform, because he wanted to affect things around the world. And so, it's definitely discouraging. It's discouraging to see, Elon Musk. But I never had to remind myself. Oh my God, yeah, of course he's a billionaire defense contractor at the end of the day, and he's being propped up by the same deep state. And for whatever reason, he decided to give people a little more free speech than any other platform. Maybe that's his edge to get people to come there, which I'm sure it is, like a marketing strategy. And
let me add one thing real quick. I heard recently somebody saying this seems like a valid point, that maybe he's just playing everybody, right? That he's just trying to get a benefit from every side. He's kind of playing towards everybody. That would make sense to me. And he's not like the big boogeyman. He's just trying to make benefit from everybody. That would make sense.
Yeah, he's definitely in bed with the Defense Department, right?
I
so
agree.
That's his deal. They couldn't do half the stuff they were doing in Ukraine without him. So, but he seems to be slightly less horrible than the rest of them. So, the same thing I feel about. I was talking to a union leader. And he was talking. I don't know anything about JD Vance. I didn't know anything about him until 5 minutes ago, right? And then I saw the Teamster, speaking at the Republican convention, and he was going on Fox News talking about the economic policies JD Vance has championed that has helped workers. And I'm like, get out of here! I didn't. And so then I have this, this union organizer friend of mine I know who works in the Northeast. And he was saying that, I've known JD Vance for a while, and hopefully there's enough space now that we can have some progressive victories with this administration. And it just goes to show you how. So if you turn on Fox News, there's the Teamster union leader talking about economic policies that JD Vance has championed in the past. And you turn on MSNBC and they're talking about Putin is happy that JD Vance is the vice presidential candidate. I mean, it's like the exact flip flop, right? So now they're doing, it's just the people who are considered supposed to be on the left are doing the red baiting, and the people on the right are having economic discussions about unions. And so it just goes to show you how effed up things are, and that people who think MSNBC or CNN or the Democratic Party is left are dupes, because they're not. They're Democrats. And I try to tell people that the Democrats are not left. And these policies, these woke policies, aren't coming from the grassroots up. They're coming from the top down. They come from places like Vanguard and BlackRock that There's several reasons for them. One is that they're the ones who are raping the planet, so they want to wrap themselves in a patina of virtue with their DEI and ESG and all that shit, and that's exactly what that is. So now, just like the CIA's doing it. The CIA put out promotional videos where they have a non-binary woman of color going around and helping coup governments, right? Isn't that fantastic? I'm not making that up. That's a real propaganda video that they put out. And the same thing with they put LGBTQ flags on bombs now at the Pentagon. I mean, it's crazy. So it used to be a joke. Now it's a reality. So
memes coming true.
So there is no left in America. That's what people don't. There is no organized left. The Democratic Party is not left. The Democratic Party is the party of Wall Street. They're the party of the military-industrial complex, big pharma, and Silicon Valley, which was also started by the deep state. So they're 100% the establishment, and they wrap themselves in that patina of virtue with their virtue signaling about BIPOC, and people of color and LGBTQIA plus two and all that stuff. So that you think they're somehow morally better. They're not. Rachel Maddow, people think that this, and I've said this a million times. Well, she's homosexual, so she's probably more moral. No, she is the biggest, unbelievable, bloodthirsty tool, warmongering piece of it on television that there is right now. She screamed about Russiagate at the top of her lungs, which she knows has to know was a conspiracy theory concocted by the FBI, CIA, and the Clinton campaign to serve the establishment. And when I was at the Young Turks and they were pushing this in 2016, I said, you know that this is just ramping people up for a war with Russia. And that's exactly what happened. 4 years later or 5 years later, they get their war with Russia. It's a proxy war. And here we are. Now they got the whole European Union going along with it. And, before it used to be, that's the Great Reset. We were all going to be in business with Russia. But then BlackRock and Vanguard had the big idea, hey, you know what? We can break up Russia into smaller parts, balkanize it, and then we can take it over and extract the wealth, just like they're doing to Ukraine right now. We could do that to Russia. That's what they thought. In fact, that's what the new top diplomat for head of the European Union just said publicly, is that we should break up Russia. So that's always been their plan, right? So that was the need for Russiagate. And so that's who these people. So again, I don't know how, but yeah, there is no left. I guess the point is that I'm trying to make is that there is no left in America that is organized, right? And if you think the Green Party is left, they're not. They're an LGBTQ organization that dabbles in environmentalism. They're not. They don't speak the language of workers. They're not about workers. They're about virtue signaling bullshit. And that's why, because they've been infiltrated by the FBI and the CIA. And that's why they haven't grown in 30 fucking years. That's why they couldn't even get on the ballot in New York State. They couldn't get on the ballot. They couldn't get but guess who did? The LaRouche people got on the ballot. So they're completely controlled opposition. The people you think are left are not left, so what are we left with? We're left with almost nothing. There is no left in America. This idea that there's a left-right struggle in America is a joke. There's a struggle between the elites, right? There's a certain set of elites fighting against another set of the elites, right? There's the Rockefeller elites going against the new money elites, which are the Trumps, and that's the tension. But obviously, we know that the CIA and the FBI doesn't work for the president, which they're supposed to, because Chuck Schumer gave that game away when Trump got elected. He said Trump shouldn't mess with the intelligence community because when you do that, they have 6 ways to Sunday to get back to you and get back at you. And what he's actually so that's called a gaffe because he told the truth. A gaffe in Washington isn't when you say something that's untrue. It's when you accidentally reveal a big truth. And that's what Chuck Schumer did. He revealed that the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI don't actually work for the president, that the president has to be afraid of them and he has to make sure he's on good terms with them or else they're going to fuck him over. And so if they don't work for the president, who do they work for? Which is the obvious follow-up question that someone like me would ask, but Rachel Maddow is a bought and paid for tool of the same people doing that. So she didn't follow that question up. But that's it. We now know that the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, the leader of the Democrats at that moment gave the game away, and he said that the intelligence community works for somebody else. So who the hell do they work for? And that's a question Americans have to ask themselves. And I know what the answer is. The answer is the same economic hitmen, the handful of billionaires who have been running all our wars since World War II, if maybe even that one.
100% agree. I think what's important there, the quick deviation from what we were talking about. I agree. I think everybody with a brain can see the kind of the infiltration of that side of the paradigm. I think that it's kind of always been like happening in certain ways, but right now I see this very clear aiming to do the same thing to the right, which has been a lot more resistant to things I've seen before. And I wonder if you notice some of the same outlines, because I think the whole game is to get people invested in what I've been kind of pointing out, like kind of what you said about the left versus like liberals or whatever the other word would be. I see Democrats and Republicans being in this locked in kind of team sport politics. They don't really care about the facts. That's the paradigm. Then you've got conservatives and liberals and people in different areas beneath that are kind of leaning towards one side or the other, but are willing to hear these conversations. And I think there's everybody else that sees through all of it. But what I see is that you have the conservative, this is how Catherine Austin Fitts put it, that right now they're using Republicans are trying to manipulate conservatives into the technocratic control structure. Right. And so it's like, if you get that block, you already have the left that's essentially completely co-opted in a lot of ways, so I wonder how you see that. Do you see the same kind of thing happening? Because that's where I see a lot of this right now with Elon and the Great Reset elements and a lot of things the right would be the most resistant to being kind of tricked into it right now. Do you see any of that?
Yeah, well, definitely, they're being tricked into the Venezuelan bullshit. I mean, that's obvious. They're also being tricked into supporting Israel. Which is the biggest. I've had people come on my show. RFK said that, it's great having Israel as our ally in the Middle East, because it's like having our own aircraft carrier in the Middle East. And I said, well, it's unfortunate that aircraft carrier has a giant concentration camp right in the middle of it.
Sure, love that.
If they are our aircraft carrier, why do we have to have all the other ones over in the in the area? But the world would be much better off without Israel. And I'm not one of those people who thinks Israel has a right to exist or it needs to exist to have a safe haven for Jews, because all the Jews I know who live in America feel very safe. In fact, they did up until Israel started doing a genocide on the Palestinian people anyway. And all the Jews I know in New York and Florida, they all feel 100% happy. And of course, I live in Hollywood, and we know about that everyone feels very comfortable. So this idea that they need a safe haven because of what happened in World War II, I don't agree with that. The Balfour Declaration, why was it up to the UK? So I think they've been suckered into that, right? This idea that they're our greatest ally. No, they're our greatest detriment. They're the ones who wanted us to go to war in Iraq. They're the ones who wanted us to go to war in Libya. They're the ones who wanted us to go to war with Iran. Now they want us to go to war in Lebanon. They're the ones who wanted us to go to war in Syria. And so it's the same thing, right? And so we keep doing their bidding. And this isn't secret, because videos that I've showed on my show of Benjamin Netanyahu coming to the Congress every couple of years saying we should go into Iran or into Iraq. And if we do this war in Iraq, it'll make everybody safer. We should go into Libya. And if we do it, it'll make everybody safer. We should go into Syria. So every time, the biggest warmongers and the biggest terrorists are Israel and the United States. And if we if we weren't being led around by the nose by Israel, which is what we are, it would be a much safer world. But who knows? I bet there's the economic hitmen in America, just like General Wesley Clark revealed on Democracy Now! In 2007, that after 9/11, he went into the Pentagon and somebody who worked in intelligence showed him a document that said they had a plan to go into 7 different Muslim countries in 5 years. And so they've gone into every one of those countries except Lebanon and Iran. And that's the ones that seem to be next on the list, right? So we're being run by a cabal of bloodthirsty economic hitmen, like we always have been. If you read, that book, Economic Hitmen, it was that's how it works. If you listen to General Smedley Butler, which is back in the 30s, he realized that every time that the military is used, it's used at the behest of a corporation to go steal
Right.
natural resources. And so nothing's changed 100 years later. We're exactly the same place we were. And yeah, I see the right wing getting, you say communism, you say Arab terrorists, they get triggered by that, right? I
Right.
mean, Bill Maher, Sam Harris, it's that kind of bullshit, juvenile thinking.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It's so sad too that it's aiming at the lowest common denominator. You're aiming at the worst parts of humanity and acting like it's somehow, intellectual. It really does kind of gross me out to watch when they're having those conversations. But since you bring it up, it's important to highlight back to the same kind of point. And it's not really just about Israel. There's plenty of other moving parts around this. But right now, I do think that it's in Israel's interest, as it always has been, more than just because of the lithium and so on, to drive this. Here is Alex Rubinstein highlighting, and this is the English version, or he posted about this, the English version of the document in which Venezuela opposition leader and longtime coup plotter Maria Corina Machado begs Netanyahu for a regime change. And here I have the version just with the parts highlighted where she's just saying, please come in and carry out a regime change and we'll be on the side of Israel. And it's just this is 2018, so it just shows you that they're asking for this help, and so the point is that you can always see these I can leave it up if you want to look at it.
I would like to take a screenshot of it. This is great.
Yeah,
I'm getting a lot of material for my show just by watching.
Go for it. Yeah, thank you. But, it's important to see that there's these overlaps where, clearly there's an interest that has nothing to do with the people of Venezuela. And as you highlighted before, it rarely has to do with the interest of any individual or any group. It's about using their plight to benefit themselves. It's a very sad concept. And so, for me, this really comes back to the larger agenda. One, I'm pointing this out because I think clearly this is about, in at least one part, getting this going on distracts from the genocide happening. And there's Israel is thinking about that with every move they make, in my opinion. But it also comes back to the point that I think why Elon is largely lying about this, that'd be my opinion, about driving the regime change, because I think like last time, it clearly benefits the interests he's in and what he's accomplishing, or he's just being driven to do it. But Elon aside, the idea of the lithium aspect to this and all the other things we discussed, from the even right policies hiding certain things, I see a very clear overlap to the Great Reset. We talked about digital IDs and all of this stuff. So might want your thoughts on how this might overlap with that and kind of the future direction of, as I framed on a show recently, the right will make regime change great again. And it's all about the idea of using these same concepts, whether it's about communism, whatever else, to achieve the certain ends, whether it's about helping Israel cement certain resources, all about the kind of same globalist play that we've seen before, but they're being manipulated and thinking it's something else. Just want your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I see them being manipulated into a war with Iran. I see my hope, and this is all I have, because if it's a Democratic administration, for sure they're going to do the war in Iran. They've been for every war in my lifetime. They love the war, and they're doing the Ukraine war right now. They're trying to ramp up the war with China. They're funding the genocide in Gaza, and they're ready to do one in Blinken, and the regime is ready to do one in Venezuela. So the only hope I have is that, I've discovered some videos where Trump is obviously not a fan of Benjamin Netanyahu, which I didn't know, because his rhetoric publicly is so over the top pro-Israel. But if you notice, he didn't start a war when he was president. I noticed. And in fact, he was being lied to by the Defense Department, by his own State Department. He was being lied to. He wanted to pull the troops out of Syria. They told him they would. They didn't. He wanted to pull. So they were lying to him they were committing treason, right? And because the president's supposed to be in charge of our foreign policy, and they didn't want him to be, because again, they don't work for the president. They all work for the blob, the global cabal of the economic hitmen. And so the only hope is that I came across a video where Trump said, or an audio recording of Trump saying that when he went in, I think it was like 2017, to have a meeting with the Bibi Netanyahu, he thought the problem was going to be the Palestinians, that the Palestinians weren't going to want a deal. But he said, after 3 minutes talking to Benjamin Netanyahu, I said, Bibi, you don't want a deal, do you? And Benjamin Netanyahu said, and he goes, so he goes, that's the problem. The problem is this Israel want a deal, not the Palestinians. And so he's realized that. He now realizes the problem, right? And so Trump's his flex is, I want a deal. I want to have he wants the credit for making these deals and avoiding wars. He even said in his acceptance speech at the convention that I could end that war with one phone call. Like that's where his mindset is, right?
Mhm.
And so whether you believe it or not, the evidence is he didn't start a war for 4 years, right? So that's the evidence. And so when he's speaking over the top rhetoric about, say, Israel and anti-Palestinians, it makes me think like this is his way he makes the deal. He's got to be seen as it's like, how Nixon was the only one who could go to China. Remember they said that?
Mhm.
It took a right-wing rabid guy like that to be able to have the credibility to go to China, right? And so it's the same thing. I think that's what Trump is doing. I'm hoping. I don't know.
I have the clip if you want to play it real quick. It'd be good since because the audio's there. And I would just say too that I definitely, but taking out Soleimani easily could have spun out into a serious war, and the regime change attempt in Venezuela could have done the same. I just think that claim tends to be used for him, but I don't know if I necessarily agree with it. At the Bitcoin conference, he just recently said too, I didn't start any wars, but I did finish some. I'm like, okay, that's not the win you think it is. But let me play this and I'll let you comment on that.
Feel it here.
He wanted to make a deal more than Netanyahu. And I will be honest, I had a great meeting with him, Abbas, right? I had a great meeting with him. And we spent a lot of time together, talked about many things. And it was almost like a father. I mean, he was so nice. Couldn't have been nicer. And after meeting with Bibi for 3 minutes, I looked at him and said, you don't want to make a deal, do you? And he said, well, and the fact is, I don't think Bibi ever wanted to make a deal.
Why?
I thought the Palestinians were impossible, that the Israelis would do anything to make peace and a deal. I found that not to be true.
Wow. That's more. Go ahead.
So he went on to have over-the-top pro-Israeli rhetoric, even with that knowledge. And I think the reason why is because he knows he has to position himself in that way in order to make a deal. He can't be seen as weak on the Palestinians or on terrorism or the Muslims. He has to be seen as this crazy, rabid, over-the-top booster of Israel in order to force a deal. And I think that's I think that might have something to do with why he was almost assassinated, because that Bibi knows that, and the Mossad knows that he's going to force a deal, or maybe they fear he will, right? And they don't want a deal. The Israelis want the Palestinians out of Gaza and the West fucking Bank, and they want it, right? And so they fear that Trump will get power, and that's why. And I bet that had something to do with that is his assassination attempt. So, and then when I hear J.D. Vance and Trump. So maybe talking tough on Iran, I hope it's the same thing. I hope it's the same thing. I have to be over the top and say this so then I can force a peace deal. And maybe that's why he killed Soleimani, was to appease these people, to give himself that kind of gravitas. Look, I killed their fucking general, right? Look at me. I don't have any love for these people. I almost started a war over that. So yeah, I'm hoping. Again, but this is what I'm hoping, because that's what the history has shown. And I hope that it continues forward, that they're talking tough and over the top like this in order to give themselves the negotiating room to actually make a deal. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that, and only time will tell. But I know for a fact that Joe Biden and the Democrats and Kamala Harris will do whatever the deep state tells them to do. And they're the ones they want to extend they just extended the Ukraine war for 10 more fucking years. I mean, there's no, so if there is a sliver of hope, that's where the sliver of hope rests in foreign policy anyway.
Well, I honestly hope you're right.
What do you think?
I hope you're right. My gut tells me that they're all the same. sadly. And I think that Trump and the rest of them, I agree that I think Trump's a different animal entirely. And I do agree entirely that he tends to, in a clumsy way, kind of blurt the thing that they're not supposed to say. And, and so I do agree with that. And one of the thoughts I had early about the assassination attempt was that very kind of thought that it could be that this is the kind of a JFK moment beforehand, like, threaten, it will go this route if you don't fall in line. But I just think, the evidence points a little bit different direction. And again, I hope that you're right. And even with an RFK point, because some people argue the same, that he's saying this in order to get in power and he'll change it. I mean, I always hope that's the end game. But the sad thing is that even if that's correct, that still argues that he would be promoting somebody murdering children as we're talking about this in order to maybe change it in the future, and it's just hard for me to praise or go, and not saying you're doing that, but to go along with that. It's sort of like Trump pretending he supports the injection. A lot of Republicans think that in order to X, Y, and Z, do something out, but at the end of the day, you're still supporting something we know is killing people, and it's hard for me to wrap my mind around that. But I think that at the end of the day, I think the history shows us that Donald Trump and the rest of them are very Zionist and very pro-Israel, and that a lot of it is about appeasing the actual population. So getting some of the Republicans to think that maybe that's where it'll go. You see a lot of these propaganda videos coming out showing where they try to pretend that he walked away from Netanyahu recently. It turned out that was an old video. It's like, well, why would they seed that? I think it's because internally they want the Republicans to think he's secretly against Bibi, and I don't know. I overall, whatever ends up stopping the killing of Palestinians, and I'm sure we agree on this, then I'm for that right now, But at the end of the day, this stuff is dangerous because the two-party illusion has a tendency to trap people using that one versus the other kind of dynamic, as you've covered. Go ahead.
They did try to kill him. You can't deny that happened. So he does pose a threat somewhere. Some way.
I would argue that there's plenty of pushback on that we don't really know what happened that day. And I would love to have the conversation if you'd like to, but we're, coming to the end of our time. But, there's a lot of discrepancy around that. I'm not trying to say I know that I'm even trying to dispute anything, but there's a weirdness there.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I know exactly what happened, but it has all the hallmarks of the Secret Service being in on it, right? They got rid of his regular detail. They didn't put somebody on that roof. They spotted that guy 3 times an hour before. They didn't do anything. The people in the crowd saw the guy with the gun, and they didn't go code red, get him off. So they were definitely that. This my theory is it came from at least Mayorkas, right? And that woman who's the head of the Secret Service might be just a patsy, but obviously that they were all in on it. There was a concerted conspiracy to do this, and that was an accident that they missed his head.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. Everything up to that last point, I'm like, exactly. There's no way you deny that that incompetence is a hard sell with how many things went wrong. But, I'm only saying this to be objective because I just think there's discrepancies around the injury, around the angles that very well may be explained by something in the next so many days or weeks or another shooter. I don't know. But I would argue, though, that it's possible that this was done with the intent of benefiting Trump. I mean, I can see that. If you ask the question of who benefits, pretty clearly one side's benefiting right now. But again, I don't know. I mean, I will add that most of the evidence points the logical direction that somebody tried to take him out. And I mean, that's where most of this points, but there's just discrepancies that I can't get past. And I won't say that that's what I think is most likely with those kind of discrepancies, like the injury itself. I find it very shocking. Go ahead.
To me, it's like when Assad was winning the war, all of a sudden he's going to drop a chlorine bomb that kills 50 people. It's like Trump was already winning this election. He's already crushing Joe Biden. And for him to take a chance of someone shooting an actual bullet and hitting it inside of his fucking head. Well, remember, he got 4 deferments, I think, for going to Vietnam. So this isn't a guy who likes that kind of shit.
But I mean, it's interesting, though, is that I think you can see, I guess the whole point in this conversation comes down to whether you think your vote translates to the outcome. And I know we disagree on that. And so I think if you're realizing from my perspective that they need us to think that Trump is the winner, just to be objective, because trust me, if I had to pick something right now, I think other than these anomalies that have yet to be answered, obviously the evidence points to exactly what you're saying. Just to be clear on that. But I think if we I guess what's holding me up on this, and it's fun, we can end with this because it's an entertaining conversation, is right now there is no visible injury on his ear. And maybe there's something that explains that. And this was 12 days afterwards when the first image came out. And Ronnie Jackson is on the record with AP saying there was a 2-centimeter hole in his ear. So I'm like, how after you reconcile, those, that doesn't make any sense to me. So maybe he lied to make him look like a gangster and it only nicked it and it healed in 12 days. I don't know, but there's something weird right there. Go ahead.
Obviously someone was shooting real bullets because people got shot behind him.
Oh, and in front of him, technically, that's where the fireman got shot, is to his right, essentially. So I agree. Yeah. I agree.
So obviously somebody was shooting real bullets. You know what? Again, it's all theory. I don't know. Yeah. Logically, it doesn't make sense, but a lot of things that logically doesn't make sense happen. So
and then later get proven with some new information. Go ahead.
Yeah. I wouldn't push that theory, but I wouldn't, you can't dismiss anything out of hand until you know exactly what happened, right? And I don't think we ever will.
Exactly. And that's usually where these things like JFK and so on, like, I think we can logically break it down to, like, I had an interview with Corey Hughes, by the way, that I think really does nail it. It's pretty obvious where go in the direction it goes in, but they've still yet to release certain things. And, so it's always kind of left hanging like that. So I guess go ahead.
If it was a fake, if Trump was in on it, that means that he would also somehow have to get Mayorkas to be in on it. He'd have to get the Secret Service to be in on it. Those snipers who saw the guy 3 times and didn't do anything. That people, it would seem that
unlikely.
Yeah, because those are all people from the Department of Homeland Security, which they, now the FBI is now also under the umbrella of the Department of Homeland since 9/11. So the same FBI who lied to the FISA court 17 times so they could get a tap on Trump's phone, which is what they did. The same FBI who had lied about Russiagate and concocted that thing so they could discredit him, so they could go. The same people, somehow now Trump's working with them to set up a fake thing on himself. That seems hard to believe.
Oh, I agree. And just to be clear, that my point is simply that those things it's a discrepancy. There's an anomalous thing that doesn't line up. Not that therefore what you said is what I think, because I don't. I honestly don't know what that adds up to. But I would point out though that the historical the classic way to dismiss a theory, how could so many people be involved and nobody's saying, it's always, I think it's important to recognize that things like that have happened. Large events, for crying out loud, look at COVID-19, what we just went through. There are still very high levels of people that are holding on to a massive lie. So I just think it's important to make sure we recognize that is possible. But, I think where it goes is what's going to ultimately make a difference, and I think comes down to the election conversation and Israel's involvement and all these different things. But I think the important point to make is that it's important and okay to continue asking questions, that's what we're saying, is that it's leave it where we don't know for sure and make sure we're continuing to not block out any possibilities. But I'm with you. Ultimately, I think that makes the most sense. And that Donald Trump was, I guess, let me ask you this. Do you think that it was just a miss? Is that what you feel is most likely? Just that it was an attempt and it missed him?
Yeah, because he turned his head at the last second to look at that chart. And then instead of it going right here, it went right here.
Well, the reason I asked that is
it's the same people who did Russiagate. It's the same people who did January 6th, right? January 6th was an inside PSYOP job. They had people dressed, They had FBI assets inside the Capitol dressed as MAGA supporters before they ever breached the Capitol. So that just shows you what was happening. They had hundreds of Fed assets in the crowd. So, and they knew they didn't get to, even anyway. So the same people who did those things, I think, are the same people who did that.
Yeah. Well, the reason I asked that is because I think what's most interesting is that the angle, and I'm telling you, I can sit down and show, I don't know how anybody can not see how if anywhere was on that building, somebody was shooting and he turns and looks at the Jumbotron, right? So he's looking to this way and the guy's over here, how you would hit the top back right part of his ear. Like, these are the kinds of discrepancies I'm pointing out where I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense, but maybe there's another shooter, I don't know. Right. But there's so many of those that nobody seems interested in trying to break down from like the higher levels of this. I just find that fascinating, but I think that it is used either way. Right. I think that's what's obvious. And I think that this will always be used as the motivation behind why we have to support him. And I think that's the hard thing I can't get away from is that, the who benefits aspect is that clearly this is driving everybody. Mark Zuckerberg endorsed Donald Trump, for crying out loud. It seems a little bit anomalous, it's strange.
I'll tell you the way that Donald Trump is going to lose if he does, because this is his election to blow. And if he decides to run on cultural issues and tries to make it about she's not really black and cat women and shit. Like, if they try to make it about that, who's weirder, that's what that's the only thing Democrats have to fight about. Because if Trump stays about the border and the economy and ending the Ukraine war, he wins. But they can't, because Kamala Harris is such a target-rich candidate. They're not going to be able to help themselves. In fact, they're already doing it. And so if Trump's going to lose, it's going to lose because he fights the Democrats on culture war issues instead of sticking to the border, the economy, and ending the war.
Yeah, well put. I mean, if there's obvious ways to lose, it would be leaning into their game, right? And I think that's obvious. They're already leaning into the whole Vance is so weird, and they're all doing the same thing.
They're out countering. Look how weird the left is. Like, don't fall for it.
Good point. Well, we can go and leave it there.
It was great. The last American Vagabond. That's always great to talk with you. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, you too, brother. I think I always enjoy our back and forth, and it's important to consider other people's perspectives across any number of views, and that's why I really enjoy the way you see things. And I think I always point to check myself as well about we always fall into these traps where we get very invested in what we think is building, and so it's always important to check those things. So thanks for coming on, Jimmy, and I look forward to talking with you in the future.
Okay, my pleasure. See you soon.
All right, have a good one, and everybody out there, question everything, come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
In the CIA, we didn't give a hoot about democracy. I mean, it was fine if a government was elected and would cooperate with us, but if it didn't, then democracy didn't mean a thing to us. And I don't think it means a thing today.